Stonepeak, the Stonepeak, the private equity firm that wants to buy your parking meters, made a bet the day before the 2024 election. They bet that Donald Trump was going to win and they were going to profit. That's when they announced they were buying Omni and its parent company in an all-cash sale for $3.1 billion. The sale went through in April of 2025, and since then, Omni's flights have quadrupled. That is what my Mother Jones story in January was about. In 14 months, they have made more than 300 deportation stops, removing thousands and thousands of people shackled at the ankles, wrists, and wrists attached to a waist chain on flights that last for days. Stonepeak is making a killing, running a modern-day slave trade, in my opinion. The Omni planes they own are being used to transport shackled Black and brown people to dangerous countries that they've never even been to. Sometimes they aren't even told where they're going to until right before the plane lands. This is Rabiatu Kuyate. She's a nurse and a grandmother, and she lived in Maryland for more than 30 years, just down the road from me. I think her kid went to the same school that mine goes to now. She'd won legal protections in federal court because she'd been a victim of torture in Sierra Leone. No criminal record, but ICE didn't care. They snatched her up and put her on an Omni plane to Ghana, a country she'd never been to, last November. She said on the flight, the guards put a man in a full-body straitjacket called the wrap and put him upside down on the floor for the entire 16-hour journey. Then they threatened her and everyone else on the plane that if they didn't behave, they were going to get the wrap too. I talked to a flight attendant on that flight. She said that man was screaming, "I'm already a dead man. I'm already a dead man," over and over. They quit. This flight attendant quit soon after. A lot of flight attendants and pilots have quit in the last year. In Ghana, Rabiatu was imprisoned in a hotel for a few days and then beaten and forced into a van and taken back to Sierra Leone. There's a video of that. It is appalling. I'm not going to show it to you. Here she is holding an image of the injuries that she got from that beating. She fled to a neighboring country and has been in hiding for the last 8 months. Her son, her grandkids, and her parents, all American citizens, now live in the house that Rabiatu owns, but she can't go home to. This is Adriana Zapata. She came to the US as a legal asylum seeker from Colombia, where she'd been sexually tortured by the national police. On April 16th, she was put on an Omni plane with 24 other South Americans and flown to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Adriana and the others were sent to a cockroach-infested motel by the airport and told that they had to go back to their countries of origin, even though all of them had won protections from deportation due to the harms they faced in those countries. Ms. Zapata has diabetes and lasting injuries because of what she endured that requires complex medical care. Within a day or two, the Congolese government told the US they didn't have the ability to care for her. Trump's State Department ignored them. Then a federal judge ordered Adriana be returned to the US. And Trump's DOJ said, sorry, we can't take her back. There's an Ebola outbreak now. Not safe. So she's still there along with the others. Her lawyer says she's not doing well, and I worry that she's going to die. This is Mehrdad Dalir. His whole family escaped persecution in Iran and resettled in the US. He was the last one to come join them. Unfortunately for him, Trump has changed asylum policies for Iranians. And it's being challenged. The legality of that is being challenged in court. But last October, he was put on an Omni plane with dozens of others. He told the New York Times he tried to slit his wrists right before getting on the plane, but the guards just patched up his wounds and forced him on board anyway. He said he and at least 8 others were carried onto the plane and that they were begging for mercy for the whole 50-hour trip. He was shouting, "I will be killed if I go back to Iran." I bet the Omni flight attendants on board could hear that. In Doha, the Qatari military boarded the plane and beat everyone who refused to get off, and then they forced them onto another plane that sent them to Iran. He managed to escape across the border to another country and is in hiding. He told the New York Times, "It feels like I'm living in a nightmare." This is a list of all the confirmed third country removals Omni has participated in since last summer. This is all based on public flight data. Omni specializes in doing the ICE flights so craven that ICE's other charter airlines won't do them. And since they have a monopoly, they charge more than double what the ICE charters do. In 2019, that was $34,000 an hour plus expenses, about 1 million per flight. It is likely more than that now. I've been asking Stonepeak and Omni and ICE what the current rate is since last November, but they have a habit of not responding to me. This is what Stonepeak told your city council about their ICE flights. Most of the largest commercial airlines in the US have also operated flights for ICE and transported deportees on regularly scheduled commercial flights. Unlike other major airlines, Omni refuses deportation and immigration-related flights that include children separated from their parents. Omni personnel do not interact with passengers as ICE agents handle all the passenger interactions. End quote. This is one of the most dishonest, deceptive things I've ever read. Sure, occasionally immigrants, usually the white ones, are transported as ticketed passengers on commercial flights, but they aren't shackled. They can get up and stretch and use the restroom. They are served the same food as the other passengers. They can get a pillow and blanket if they're cold. On Omni's ICE flights, adult passengers are shackled at the wrists and ankles attached to a chain around their waists. Here's a Getty photo of a guard dragging the shackles out onto the tarmac beforehand. And by the way, the shackles that ICE uses, Hyatt, for these flights are the exact same brand and style invented to move enslaved people in coffles. They can't stretch, they can't stand up, they are often prohibited from using the restroom and soil themselves. I've heard this from 3 former Omni flight attendants. They are watched the entire time by dozens of GEO Group guards who threaten them, use racial slurs, feed them an inadequate amount of food that is disgusting anyway, including feeding ham sandwiches to Muslims. And just like the private ICE prisons, they keep the lights on the whole time and the plane freezing cold. And there are no pillows and blankets. Saying that, other airlines do it is like comparing Broadview to a Holiday Inn. You'll notice that in that statement, Stonepeak did not mention the GEO Group guards. They say that ICE agents handle all passenger interactions, but they don't. They sit up in first class with the paperwork. The GEO Group guards do everything. And it says they don't deport unaccompanied minors. First of all, I've heard from one Omni flight attendant that that isn't true. Now, I can't prove that, but in any case, even if they don't, they still deport families, including children, from tiny little babies to teenagers. And when a 2-parent family is deported, they still make one of the parents be shackled. And this I know is true because I have seen photos that Omni flight attendants weren't supposed to take and took anyway. One of these flight attendants wept as they described to me seeing little kids traumatized by the sight of their parents shackled. One Omni flight attendant told me that on this ICE flight to Colombia on September 24th, an immigrant may have killed himself using medication given to him by the guards. ICE generally gives people a week's worth of their medications as they get off the plane when they're being deported. But the guards on this flight handed out the meds while the plane was descending into Bogota, he said. And as soon as no one was looking, the man took all of them. This flight attendant told me a flight medic started to panic, telling the ICE agents, "We have to get him off the plane and into an ambulance as soon as possible or he's going to die." But the ICE guys, they didn't seem that concerned. They slow walked it. They kept doing their paperwork. And later, on the next flight to Brazil, the flight medic was just sitting there in shock going, "There's no way that guy lived." Let me be clear, I do not know if this is true. I haven't been able to prove it. Stonepeak and Omni and ICE have not responded to me, but maybe your city council could ask them. All 3 of the Omni flight attendants I talked to had heard about another flight to Colombia where immigrant passengers refused to get off the plane because they were scared. So they were tear gassed inside the Omni plane to get them to come out. Again, I don't know if this is true, but everyone at the company has heard it. Maybe your city council could ask them. Here's an Omni plane full of shackled Indian immigrants that Omni pilots flew straight into a blizzard in February. They landed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire to refuel, but the airport was already closed because of the weather, and airport officials told local media, "We had no idea it was coming until 15 minutes before the plane landed." It got frozen to the ground, and passengers and crew sat there for 14 hours until it could get unfrozen and tucked to the gate. And then ICE agents and the GEO Group guards cordoned off a section of the airport and let the passengers deplane and sleep on the floor that night. But they weren't unshackled. They were shackled for 59 hours straight while being deported. And that's not even the longest I've heard about. In the last 9 months, immigrants being deported on Omni's ICE flights have been shackled for 68 hours, 75 hours, 82 hours. There's public flight data proving this. And I've talked to the immigrants and flight attendants who were on those flights. One of them, a Laotian man named Vinny Tongtiu, said there were at least 20 elderly people on his deportation flight who were so weak by the time they got there that they had to be carried off the plane. For my Mother Jones story about this, I talked to a medical doctor and a forensic pathologist who studied ICE's prison camps. She had no idea that conditions could be even worse on the planes than they are in the camps. She said, in addition to the cuts and bruises and permanent nerve damage that prolonged shackling causes, it's very likely immigrants have developed blood clots, DVTs, on these flights, which can become deadly days or weeks later when you start moving around again. But ICE doesn't keep track of that. You don't have to torture them, she told me. They're on a plane. They're not going anywhere. She compared these planes to the boxcars carrying Jews during the Holocaust. The woman on the left is Melissa Tron. She's a mother of 4. Her youngest is now 7. She came to the US as a refugee when she was 10. She was shackled for 2 days straight while being deported to Vietnam. She told me my body was aching all over. I felt like I was less than an animal. So what did James Wiper, Stonepeak's representative, tell your city council about the finance committee hearing a couple weeks ago? He was good. He had this whole bumbling act. He said what he thought ICE was doing was horrible, and he has an immigrant in his family. And he cast doubt on the number of ICE flights I reported in my Mother Jones story. He said he didn't think it was that high, even though I'm using public flight data, and he provided no numbers of his own to the council. He also claimed they were trying to sell Omni, but provided no documentation of that. He told the council he's been assured that none of their people, Omni employees, have been involved in the abuses on their planes. I think he's probably right about that. The Omni flight attendants aren't doing this stuff. They're just witnessing it and incurring moral injuries and being traumatized by it. And they are getting constantly screamed at by the GEO Group guards anytime they try to enforce a federal aviation regulation. And when they tell their supervisors about it, their supervisors say, just make the client happy, we need the money. I heard about one flight attendant who told a GEO Group guard he couldn't block the aisle with a blow-up mattress that he'd brought on board to sleep on. And when she told him that, he stood over her and screamed at her that he wanted to kill her. I heard this from a firsthand witness. When she told her supervisors about it, she was punished. When these flight attendants asked their supervisors, how are we supposed to evacuate 200 shackled people within 90 seconds, which is what all flight attendants are federally mandated to do, no one will answer them. They have received no training on this, which is against federal law. When they can get an answer, the answer is, just save yourselves, let the immigrants die. James Wiper hasn't done any investigation himself about if all of this stuff is true. When he says he's been assured, he's talking to these supervisors, the ones who are saying, let the immigrants die, we need the money. Oh, and by the way, the ICE agents and the guards on these flights tell the flight attendants before every flight, don't feel bad for these people. They're all rapists and murderers. James Wiper told the city council he's done everything he can to try to reduce the block hours that Omni does for ICE. I first contacted Stonepeak about the abuses on Omni's ICE flights last November. No response, and the block hours didn't go down. The New York State Comptroller's Office called Stonepeak in early January because their public employee retirement fund is invested with Stonepeak, as is Illinois', by the way. And they were concerned The abuses happening on Omni's flights violated their ESG policy. The block hours did not go down. My Mother Jones story came out in late January. The block hours didn't go down. Block hours started going down in May and June after Chicago media started reporting on the Stonepeak deal to buy your parking meters and their connection to ICE, and that the deal had to be approved by the city council. When they've got a couple $1 billion on the line, what do you know? Suddenly, they do have the power to make immigrants' lives less miserable. Your city council has incredible power right now, and Stonepeak knows it. They have the opportunity to stand up and say no. A private equity firm that profits off of human trafficking and torture will not be a good steward of your parking meters, and they don't deserve to profit off of Chicagoans. And yes, they are threatening to sue if the city council doesn't approve the deal. But if the council was somehow required to vote yes, then why does the provision requiring their approval exist in the first place? What I have heard from people around City Hall is that unless they hear some outrage from their constituents, this approval is going to sail through. Yesterday, the committee vote was scheduled for July 13th. That's next week. And the full council vote was scheduled for July 15th. I urge the council not to approve this deal until Stonepeak answers their questions, the council's questions about these abuses. I urge the council to not approve this deal until the alleged sale of Omni is complete. ICE, once again, is snatching up Chicagoans every single day and flying them down to their gulags in the South, just like U.S. Marshals and slave catchers did in the 1800s. In 1860, a slaveholder named Stephen Knuckles showed up in Chicago looking for Eliza Grayson, a 20-year-old Black woman who had self-emancipated from his plantation. He got a federal warrant for her arrest, but had some trouble finding local officials who would help him enforce it. He had to bring in a kidnapper for hire. One of those local officials, a deputy sheriff, alerted some abolitionists, and together they got Eliza out of jail and up to Canada. They risked getting in trouble for that, and they did it anyway. I urge the council to be like their ancestors in local government. Do not participate in our federal government's human trafficking scheme. Do not be intimidated by threats of a lawsuit. Protect and represent your people, and vote with them at the top of your mind. Is that not why you became elected officials? Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for that history and for being on top of sort of reporting on these things. It's super important that we know what's going on. I think the world of contracting in the city is often intentionally obscured.
100%.
It takes a contract lawyer oftentimes to be able to read some of these things, and we've encountered this in our research for the committee around surveillance technologies, data sharing clauses in various contracts. And so really happy to have you share your research. I just wanted to, again, couch us in where we are right now and what we do know for sure, and then what is potentially coming down the pike. So in Chicago, the way legislation, the way a bill becomes a law essentially is that an ordinance or a piece of legislation is researched and drafted. It is then introduced at a full council meeting and referred to committee. Then the chair of the committee has to add that legislation to the committee agenda. If the chair adds legislation to the agenda, then it is heard at a meeting in committee. Then there's a vote in that committee to recommend do pass or do not pass, or the item could be held in committee. So if the legislation is recommended do pass or do not pass in committee, then that recommendation carries through to full city council, right? And then the legislation is heard in council, typically the next council meeting. Then all 50 alders have the opportunity to vote on it, not just the committee members in committee, but all 50 council members have the opportunity to vote on it. Legislation from the full council meeting after voting can either pass, it can, by some parliamentary move be held in council, and it could also fail as a vote. And then once that is done, then the sort of administrative back-end bureaucracy team works on planning and rulemaking towards the implementation of that. The legislation becomes law and is, in theory, implemented on the effective date, and then implementation starts. So just kind of wanted to go through that for folks here so that you understand how a bill becomes a law in the city of Chicago. Where we are with this ordinance is that on May 20th, Mayor Johnson introduced this ordinance to council, and it was successfully referred to the Committee on Finance. On June 25th, the Committee on Finance did hold a subject matter hearing, including, like I said, executives from the parking meter, Stonepeak Partners, and took questions from committee members. But there were no votes taken on the item. In here, which I'll share with everyone who registered, I did a bit of transcription of some of those questions, and also there's a link to the full video here in case you want to just watch the video for yourself. July 13th is the next Committee on Finance meeting. So there's actually no agenda posted for this meeting yet. So we don't know which items are going to be on the agenda for that meeting, but this item could be up for a vote at this meeting. Agendas have to be posted to the clerk's website 48 hours prior to the meeting. So I'll be on the site refreshing 48 hours prior to the meeting to see if it's on the agenda. And July 15th is then the city council meeting, that if the item is passed out of finance on the 13th, if it's held in that meeting, then that is where the full council could vote on it. And so the opportunities for advocacy are in all the areas where I've indicated that there are opportunities for advocacy. We are now in a moment where reaching out to your alder and telling them what you think could be helpful. And so we've created a sort of toolkit. Let me see if you're able to tell me if you're able to see this toolkit at this moment or not. Okay. There's just sort of like helpful information here around the legislation itself, the timeline milestones, the committee membership and the committee, and then just ways that you can get involved and do advocacy. One of which is being here, so thanks for being here. But I think that, again, between now and potentially the 13th, if the Committee on Finance chair chooses to put it on the agenda between now and then, is a great time to reach out to your alder and tell them how you feel around it. And then if it passes out of committee, or even if it is recommended do pass, or if it is recommended do not pass, between that and the 2 days between when full city council votes on it is also a good time to advocate. So I'll again, these materials will all be sort of available to you after this meeting has concluded, and we sort of encourage you to reach out to your alders on this, and you can keep up with the committee on these platforms in case we have further updates on this and the many other things that we are working on. So at this point, I'm going to